Grown and Growing Podcast, episode number 51. Life experiences that shaped my money mindset. You're listening to Grown and Growing with Sonia Hamlin. Welcome back to the Grown and Growing Podcast. Today, I'm solo. And I'm talking about one of my favorite topics, money and personal finance. Oh, but Sonia, money is the root of all evil. First off, it's not. It's the love of money that is the root of all evil. I wish people would get that correct. Second of all, capitalism is this country's core value. So it is to your advantage to understand the coin, how to make it, how to save it, and how to multiply it. I'm sure, like many of you, my journey with money has its highs and its lows. And my perspectives about money and how to manage it continue to grow and evolve as I get older. Of course, I'm not an expert, but I have educated myself by reading multiple books, taking lots of courses, listening to many podcasts. Since I was young, I've always had the desire to be responsible with money, but I haven't always had the knowledge, which led to some really poor financial decisions. Today, not only am I more comfortable with managing my money in a way that makes me feel secure, I'm also learning how to release some long-held, deeply rooted beliefs about money, which is a process, y'all. I'm not where I want to be, but thank God I'm not where I was. So today, I want to talk to you about a few key life experiences that shaped my perceptions and my philosophies on money. So let's take it back to the beginning, right? Everything starts with your childhood. So of course, I have to begin with how I grew up. I grew up in a Black middle-class suburb in Cleveland, but I would categorize my family as lower middle class. While both of my parents worked, we didn't have a lot of money outside of taking care of necessities. My parents did, however, prioritize what was important to them, which was a safe place for us to live and education for me and my sisters. So let's start with talking about our home. I would consider my childhood home a modest single-family home in a working-class Black neighborhood. I loved our neighborhood. It had tree-lined streets, it had nicely kept yards, and a real sense of community with our neighbors. But I know that my parents struggled and sacrificed a lot for us to move there. We were there, but it was like by the skin of our teeth. The next thing they prioritized was education for us. Though we didn't have a lot of money, my parents sacrificed to send me and my sisters to private school for most, if not all, of our education. Even as a young child, I knew this was a huge sacrifice born out of love, and it was ultimately an investment in our future. It was only as an adult that my mother really shared stories of how much she sacrificed of herself, right? Her mental and her physical self, and her relationships, right, with my dad and her family to give us the best education. I see many parallels of my childhood in my life now. While I'm not in the same financial situation as my parents, I see many parallels in the type of lifestyle I would like to give my kids. For example, like my desire for manicured lawns and tree-lined streets and neighborhood kids running around and a sense of community. Also, sending my kids from private school. Thinking about it in preparing for this podcast, I actually was amazed at how parallel my life is now to what my parents gave us as children. I never really thought about it before. In thinking about my childhood, there are a couple of takeaways or observations that I can directly draw a link from my childhood to how I manage money. The first one is how I manage household bills. I consider my household bills my number one priority. There is nothing more important to me than having a roof over my head, heat, water, electricity, a place to call home. That is my number one responsibility. I learned this lesson because it was not what was always practiced in my house when I was growing up. And it's not because my parents didn't want to provide this for us. It's just that sometimes life was lifing. I don't know all the details, but I do know there were times where we didn't have electricity or water or heat. My parents also had this thing where they used to put something on the bills versus paying them off in full. How this manifests in my life currently is that I always pay off my utility bills in the month they are due. And it's almost an obsession. To the point my husband was like, why is this so important to you that this bill be paid in the month? Because I don't like to pay on things. I like to pay off things and move on. I don't want to carry anything from one month to the next. This is probably why I really didn't like layaway. Like, I want to go in the store, give me my stuff now. I don't want to have to come in and pay on it. I really don't. I also want to say that this is no judgment on my parents because I know that they did the best that they were able to do. And I am proud of the way they raised me. The second thing is how I prioritize education in my household. I also put my kids in private school for some of their elementary education. And when the opportunity presented itself, I moved to a neighborhood with those same characteristics that I admired, coupled with good public schools. So those are the two lessons that I really got from my childhood that directly influence on how I manage money today. The next phase I want to talk about, I named in my notes, out of the nest. Y'all, this is officially grown. I probably wouldn't have agreed back then, but I wasn't really grown until I crossed the stage at Morgan State University. College was the last time I asked my parents for any type of financial support. Once I walked across that stage, I was officially on my own. One thing I will say about undergrad was that I paid for school 100% with student loans, which were in my name. I should also mention that I was an out-of-state student, so those student loans kind of racked up. The one thing that I didn't get to participate in undergrad was refund checks. I don't know how it went down at PWIs, but at HBCUs, refund checks were a thing. People really stunted when they got their refund checks. You could tell there were cars, there were clothes, there were nights out. But somehow I missed the boat on that. Somehow, not by my own doing, my loans were just enough to cover tuition and room and board and no more. I never got a refund check. And at the time, I was a little salty about it. Not salty enough to go try to do something about it. But I was like, dang, I wish I would get a refund check. Now I know that probably wasn't the best decision because I was going to have to pay back all that money later on. Back to after undergrad. I got my first job at a financial services firm in Washington, D.C., making around $33,000. Because a friend was looking out for me, or maybe it was because I was bunking in her spare bedroom, I was able to rent a beautiful 2-story condo with great views in Alexandria, Virginia for $800 a month. Guys, this apartment was way too nice for me and my little $33,000 salary. I was the embodiment of how to make $1 out of 15 cents. I worked for 2 years, then quit my job to go on to grad school in Richmond full time. I paid for grad school 100% with student loans, and I used federal and personal loans. It was during this time where I really learned how to manage a household on my own. One lesson that I took from this time period that I still do today, that I learned with this $800 a month rent, was never to pay my rent out of one paycheck. I had to learn that the hard way, living on my own. I learned it fast and quick that I want to take rent out of multiple checks. That is something that I still do today because it's kind of a lifesaver. The lessons or observations / takeaways from early adulthood were, it really taught me that I am capable of taking care of myself. This period taught me that being independent mattered to me. It was a badge of honor and a pride point that I was able to take care of myself and never have to ask my parents to provide me support as an adult. I've never asked them for money. The other lesson or observation from this time period that really shaped my money mindset was having to make a choice between career and love. When I graduated from grad school at the age of 26, I could have worked in any of the big cities in the US because that's where most ad agencies were. But I chose to go back to DC, not a city that's great for my industry. I did it to further my relationship with Derek, my husband. It was a gamble for a couple of reasons. One, would this relationship even work out, right? And number two, it would be extremely difficult to find a job. Spoiler alert, I was able to find a job in my industry, and Derek and I did get married. But I do wonder, what if? What if I took that job in San Francisco that I was interviewing for, or New York? What if I moved somewhere else? I also wonder if it wasn't ingrained in me to check off these boxes, go to school, get an education, get a job, get married, to achieve the American dream, would I have made the same decisions? Although it all worked out for me, I also know that I wouldn't advise my daughter, Sienna, to do the same thing. The next phase I want to discuss, I've written it as, in my notes, as marriage and the American nightmare. I guess you guys can see where this is going. This is the phase of my life where dutifully checking boxes backfired. And it would cause me a lot of pain and teach me some very hard lessons. The first thing I'll say is that Derek and I knew nothing about what it took to have a successful marriage. I'm sharing this because my delusions about marriage caused me to make some really dumb financial decisions. Let's talk about them, shall we? We got married in December of 2006. And before we even signed the marriage certificate, we were already in the early stages of building a dream house, quote unquote, in York, Pennsylvania. Right now, that sounds like an oxymoron to me, but I'll continue. York, PA is about an hour north of Baltimore, and people routinely commute to Baltimore for work. There were many red flags, but I ignored them all and kept pushing because this was the next step in building a successful life, right? This is what I was supposed to be doing. Let's talk about some of these red flags. Red flag number one. Red flag number one. The house was only in my name because Derek just started his law firm. We should have held off on this big purchase until we knew more about how his law firm would perform. We didn't. Red flag number two, or I should say red flags number 2 through 10. Buying a house in a city or town that I didn't know much about and not understanding the home buying process. I hated living in York, PA, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Because I didn't understand mortgages and the home buying process, we ended up with a 80/20 loan with a variable interest rate on one of those loans. And just so you know, an 80/20 loan is a loan that is split between two different lenders. And it's split that way so that you can, the 20% is meant to cover the PMI so that you don't have to put down a down payment. So we didn't put down a down payment on this quote unquote dream home. Our loan officer lied about our income on the paperwork. He misled us about our refinancing options, leading us to believe that we would be able to refinance right away. The paperwork said otherwise. And just so you know about this loan, this type of loan, it's no longer offered to home buyers because it left thousands of home buyers upside down on their loans and was ultimately a big reason for the 2008 housing crisis. So yeah, we were all swept up in that housing crisis. Red flag number 3, our monthly payments were too big. If we were a little less delusional, we would have seen that this was not sustainable. We were house poor, y'all. We had this big, beautiful house with all of these rooms and couldn't afford a thing else. We couldn't afford to decorate it. We couldn't afford to have people over, but we had this beautiful house. I will try to spare you the gory details and quickly try to summarize how it all ended. We stayed in the house for 3 years and it all caught up with us in 2009. We were already behind on our mortgage, so we decided to cut our losses and put the house up for sale, hoping to beat the foreclosure process. Unfortunately, there were a few huge problems with that plan. Number 1, the country was in deep recession, caused ironically by the housing crisis. We owed more than the house was worth, and there were very few sellers. And I'll also add that at this time, there weren't a lot of realtors who really understood the short sale process. It wasn't until we found a specialist to help us were we able to sell our home. So it was very difficult at the time. It took many months, but we were able to hold off foreclosure and sell our house as a short sale, which is basically selling the house for way less than what we paid. Fortunately for us, Obama was elected president in 2008, and he extended a law that said you didn't have to pay taxes if your loan was settled for less than what you originally got it for. So we basically had an $80,000 loan forgiven and were able to walk away without paying taxes on that money. And just in case you're wondering, when you settle a debt for less than what's owed, the government sees the difference of what you didn't pay as income, and you're required to pay taxes on that. First of all, that's some bullshit. Like, for real, if we had the money to pay for it, we would pay for it, maybe. But why are you taxing it? That's so dirty. Anyway, we didn't get off completely scot-free, though. We had completely strained our marriage. And while I didn't have a foreclosure on my credit, I did have a credit score that was about 520. So there were many lessons and takeaways from this time in my early marriage. The first one I'll say is just overall perception, right? We all know by now that the American dream is some BS, and keeping up with the Joneses will cost you. I think a lot of people think they don't try to keep up with the Joneses, but we do try to keep up with our friends, right? If they're going out for dinner, we want to go. If they're going on a trip, you want to go. They're going to a concert, you want to go. It's more like FOMO. If keeping up with the Joneses make you feel like uncomfortable, you can say it's FOMO. We all suffer from FOMO from time to time. The second observation was, for a long time, I blamed my husband, the loan officer, the system, and I blamed myself for the predicament we were in. But I really want to focus on the blame on my husband and the loan officer, although the loan officer, I feel like he was a liar. But for my husband, I felt like because he had bought houses before, that he should have seen the pitfalls of where we were going, and he didn't. But I totally ignored the fact that I didn't know anything about buying a house, and I didn't try to rectify that at all. I did zero research. I felt like this was the next step. My husband knew I was going to lean on him, and that was what I was supposed to do. And that was dumb. It wasn't that I couldn't lean on Derek. It's just that buying this house is a shared responsibility, and we're both supposed to come to the table knowing what we're getting ourselves into. And I can even make the case that I should have been more prepared than he was, given that the house was solely in my name. After years of reflection and some therapy, I realized that I needed to trust my gut, voice my concerns, and be an active participant in my finances. Derek did not deserve all the blame that I heaped on him. Number 3, understand what truly makes you happy and fills you with joy, and build your life around that. If I truly knew myself and what would bring me joy, I never would have moved to York, Pennsylvania, which is a red county in central Pennsylvania. It's just not my style. It's not my steez. I think about that every time I make a decision. When I was buying a house last year or the year before, I was adamant where I wanted to live because I knew what it was like to live in an area that was far, live in the country, be separated, or have a large distance between you and your friends and your support system. I learned that lesson because I lived in York, Pennsylvania. The next phase I want to talk about is called rebuilding. This is the phase in my life where I had come out of this bad situation in York, and we were really focused on rebuilding our relationship, rebuilding our financial management skills, and just getting our house in order. There were a few good things that, in hindsight, were blessings about that home buying fiasco. I am grateful that we made these financial mistakes early in our 30s, so we still had time to recover and learn from them. Here's how we started to rebuild. The first thing I note is Derek and I started going to marriage counseling, which eventually led to individual counseling, both of which we still do today, which has been a tremendous blessing and help in our marriage. The second thing is during this rebuilding time, like on the tail end of leaving York, Pennsylvania, we were introduced to Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey, of course, he was on the radio in York, Pennsylvania, because that's his audience. But anyway, we found him, and I became slightly obsessed with his radio show, videos, and eventually podcasts that talked about his style of money management, which really focused on reducing debt. We followed his program. We actually took his class to help us get out of debt and to be on the same page about money. Listening to his stories, listening to people scream out they're debt-free really gave me hope that one day I too could be debt-free and turn my life around. Number 3, the next thing we did to rebuild was I focused on making more money. Look, You can't cut enough from your budget to reach financial prosperity or financial freedom. It's just not going to happen. There's not that much cutting in the world. Eventually, you have to make more money. You cannot rely on cutting expenses alone. The next thing I did was to stop waffling on the decision to pay off my $80,000 in student loans. I waffled on this decision to pay off my student loans. Part of me just wanted to keep them around forever and just never pay them off. I would just die with them and that would be fine because $80,000 just seemed insurmountable. And then there was a part of me, the part who listened to Dave Ramsey, who thought, damn, I can really pay these loans off if I just focused. I think I can do it. I decided to actually pay my loans off. And when I made that decision, I committed. I started making double and triple payments to my loans, and any extra money that I got, bonuses, tax refunds, whatever it was, I put it on my student loans. One of the last things that I did to rebuild was learn about the stock market. I believe the year was 2016, or we were going into 2016, and it was my New Year's resolution to learn about the stock market and trading and investing. Luckily, during that time, I was able to join a group on Facebook called Stocks and Stilettos, where the founder of this group developed an introductory course on how to learn about the stock market. I took it and I was basically hooked. I learned so much about the stock market just from that introductory course. I went on to learn how to do covered calls. I dabbled in swing trading. I learned how to do options trading with calls and puts. I looked into individual stocks and bought individual stocks. I was kind of trying to find the thing with investing that I could stick with for the long term. A lot of people taking these courses looked at this type of trading, covered calls or options trading, as a way to supplement their income. So they used it as income. I never quite got to that stage because what I also realized during this time was that my risk tolerance is not very high. I have a low risk tolerance when it comes to money. So even though I learned so much about trading, I never actually made the jump. What I realized worked for me was the simple approach. And the simple approach to me is investing in S&P 500 index funds, which is what I do today. So what lessons or observations did I get from rebuilding? Number one, I learned to live below my means. Dave Ramsey was good at getting you to cut everything to bare bones and just work on paying off debt. And I also saw the value in delayed gratification. I was a master at delaying gratification. I learned to not let it bother me. I also learned that I am resilient, determined, and that I have the ability to overcome hardships. The other lesson that I got out of this time period is that I'm not afraid to not know the answer, and I will ask for and seek help from people who know more than me. The last life experience that I want to highlight is the time period that I'm in right now, which I entitled Finally Feeling Balanced. I wanted to say free. I wanted to say finally feeling free, but I am not, nor do I feel financially free. Maybe that's coming in another stage of my life. When I reached my late 30s and early 40s, my lifestyle of being super vigilant and hyper-focused when it came to my finances took a toll. It was clear to me that this lifestyle was no longer necessary, nor was it sustainable for me. I got a lot of positives out of living this way, right? I didn't have that many bills. I had zero debt. I managed to pay off my $80,000 of student loans. I was able to take care of my family. My kids at the time were in private school, but later I bought a house in an area where I didn't have to pay for private school. I was just living life below my means. And to me, that's a positive. There were a lot of negatives too. I was tired. I felt stuck. I was probably depressed. And this didn't really have a lot to do with money, but the lifestyle I was living to manage my money probably didn't help. My life was routine and lacking joy. And it was really time for me to evolve. I started thinking to myself, are you here just to pay bills and die? Yeah. So earlier on in this stage, I started looking for a new perspective on money. It was important to me to have perspectives that aligned with my financial goals and aligned with who I was at my core. I was prioritizing joy, and I needed to know how to do that without putting my financial security in jeopardy. I learned about myself that financial security is a core value of mine. Financial security means safety for me, and feeling safe is something that I definitely value. I also had to learn that it was okay to say yes to my wants and my desires. This was very hard for me to say yes to the things that I wanted, because I had downplayed wanting those things for so long that it was hard for me to spend money on myself without feeling a tremendous amount of guilt. Another thing I had to learn in this phase was to trust myself with money again. This is one of the reasons I had to leave Dave Ramsey behind. He is very good at teaching scarcity, right? He is very good at getting you to want nothing and stay hyper-focused on paying off debt and eating beans and rice and beans. But he doesn't do a good job, in my opinion, of helping people leave that lifestyle and that mindset behind and finding a new normal for their new financial life. He doesn't do a good job of that. And people often stay stuck in that mindset of, I can't have, I can't do. And I think that's a problem. What I also realized during this period is that I need safety nets in place. Safety nets for me means a savings account with 6 months to cover bare bones expenses if something happens. It means automating my retirement savings at work and outside of work and not touching it. It means term life insurance for me and Derek. And it also means estate planning, where I have a will, a trust, end of life instructions, or in the event that I become incapacitated, plans in place for my family. Those are what I considered safety nets that I had to put in place. My approach to finances now is all about finding a healthy balance. I won't abandon that part of me that gains safety and security by having my finances in order. I'm also giving myself permission to spend, quote unquote, on luxury and life experiences. Of course, I had to give myself some guardrails, because you hear the word luxury and life experiences, and what does that mean? For over 10 years, I was strictly a no debt person. I did not believe in debt under any circumstances, but I've loosened my stance on that a little with guardrails. So the first thing is, I do have a credit card now after about 10 years of not having one. The guardrails are, I pay off the credit card every month. And in order to buy it, I have to have the cash right now to pay for it. So the credit card is not used to extend the money I have. It's not there to be a bridge until I maybe get the money. It is just a convenience factor, right? And if I can't pay that thing off or this bill at the end of the month, then I have failed and I shouldn't have the card. That's basically how I feel. I don't ever want to pay interest on the credit card that I have. And in order to make that happen, I have to pay the card off every month. I also bought a new to me car with a car note. And one of the guardrails that I put in place in order for me to go ahead and do this is to have a big down payment and have the goal of paying it off within 2 years. So that would make me feel better about accruing this debt. The last thing I'll say, it's not really a guardrail, it's more of a mindset, is that cash is still king over here. It is. I use cash for almost 90% of our life. I save for big purchases like trips or vacations, renovations, holidays. If I don't have the money right away because it costs more than I have, or I don't have an amount allocated for that, I will put money away and save for it. That is where the delayed gratification in me comes into play. So I have these guardrails in place because I know that it's important to me to live life, but also have financial security. And this is the way that I've found balance. So those are the life experiences that got me to the person I am now. I am still evolving. This list may change in a few years and I will have new lessons, right? Hopefully they are lessons born out of positive experiences and not pain, but we shall see. I do want to leave you with a few lessons that overall put me in a better place with money. The first thing I'll say is to confront your money situation. I know so many people who don't even open their bills. You can't confront what you can't see. And eventually it will catch up with you. I am almost anal about opening my bills and putting them in a place where I can see them. I don't ever want to be intimidated by my bills. I want to look at them and say, that's bigger than I like, but I'm going to pay it off. Or I spent too much and I need to pull back on that. Or we out here with the heat too high. We need to turn it down. Something like that. I just think putting your head in the sand never helped anyone, especially not when it comes to money. The second thing I'll say is to learn from reputable individuals. There are a lot of people out here pushing quick, easy, fast ways to make money, and they don't know what the hell they're talking about. They don't. You really have to have discernment when it comes to who you're going to follow and where you're going to get your financial advice from. I think later on in the week, I'll share on my social media a couple of financial experts that I follow now. They're very different than Dave Ramsey's and the Susie Ormans of the world, but I value their philosophies, their approach, and how they teach people to manage money. The third thing is find a plan that fits your life and beliefs. I went through all of the life experiences, not all, but I picked a few life experiences that really shaped my money philosophy. Because they are my personal life experiences, they will not mirror yours. Yours will feel different. Yours will be different. Different things will make you feel secure. You'll have different struggles than I have. And so it's important for you to find a plan that fits your life and fits your goals and fits who you are at your core. The next thing is understand what trade-offs you're willing to make and how long you're willing to make them. You can't achieve financial success, or as the Budgetnista says, you can't achieve financial wholeness without some trade-offs somewhere. And the trade-offs may be short-term or they may be long-term, but you have to decide what those are and what you're willing to give up in order to get to where you want to be. The last thing that I want to leave you with is it's never too late to start. It's never too late to start. You could be 50 years old and retiring in 15 years. It's never too late to start to save for retirement. Something is better than nothing. Please do not give up. Just start where you are today. I promise you, you won't regret it. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.